Buenos días, todo el mundo. Good morning, everyone. While I am temporarily out, I wanted to provide a quick recap, some sort of coverage of the worksheet covering Spanish definite and indefinite articles and a little bit on Spanish nouns. This was the worksheet that was on Canvas last week. And if you have not yet completed it, then unfortunately, it will be, if you can still turn it in even if you watch this video, but it will be for a late grade. I do want you to complete these because they cover some very, very important information. So I'm going to go through this as quickly as I can, but it is a lot of information, so please be patient and make sure you listen and take your own good notes if that is helpful to you, okay? So as you know by now, definite articles in Spanish are el, la, los, and las in Spanish. So they all either start with the letter L or they have the letter L in them. Okay, and their equivalent in English is just the word the. I know that's a bit confusing because we only have the one word the, but Spanish has these four words all together, and we use them in different situations. Now, if you look at these, especially if you're a good visual learner, you can see that one major difference between them, well, we have a lot of differences and similarities here. The first two words here, even though they start with different letters, they do not have an S on the end. Whereas these two here, los and las, do have S's on the end. So that's a hint to you that whenever you are going to use el and la to say the something in Spanish, you're only going to do so with a word that is singular, a singular noun, not a plural noun. If your noun is plural, you're going to use los or las, okay? What do I mean by singular and plural? Hopefully you know that, but just in case you don't, singular just basically means one of something. So for example, dog is a singular word, singular noun, and plural just means more than one. So dogs would be plural, okay? Now, let's start with just our singular nouns. We know now that we're only going to use el or la to say the something when that thing is singular in Spanish, right? But how do we know which one to use? That's where you need to know the gender of the word, the gender of the noun, okay? Now in Spanish, usually that's going to be fairly obvious based on the spelling of the word, and that's covered in these notes here. But if the last letter of the word, the last letter of the noun ends in the letter O, usually that noun will be masculine. I stress usually because there are many exceptions to this, but in this worksheet, you do not need to worry about those exceptions. Basically, when in doubt, if a noun ends in the letter O, you should assume that it's masculine. I say that just because there will be times where maybe you have a test or quiz and the gender is not indicated and you really have no idea what the gender is, but you need to know for the test or quiz. When in doubt, if that noun ends in the letter O, 90% of the time it's going to be masculine, okay? So that's a good rule of thumb. Same thing for if the noun ends in the letter A. That usually, not always, but usually will be feminine, okay? And this should be fairly obvious, but if a noun ends with the letter S, it's plural, usually. There are some exceptions to that as well, but generally speaking, that is going to be the case, okay? And always remember that plural nouns still have a gender. Just because they are plural does not mean they suddenly do not have genders. So that's why we have two different articles in Spanish for plural nouns. One is for masculine plural and one is for feminine plural. So let's go back to this list here. We were saying that we want to focus on just singular nouns right now. So let's say that I tell you to give me the article, the definite article that would go with the word manzana, which means apple. You can hear in that word alone, manzana, which by the way is spelled manzana, manzana means apple. You can see and hear that the end of that word is the letter A or A in Spanish, okay, en español. So chances are the definite article that we're going to use before this noun to say the apple is going to be la. And in this case, that would be correct, okay? So now we have written la manzana, the apple, okay? Whereas if I give you a noun such as, let's say, I'm trying to give you one that you've never heard before. Oh my gosh, I'm coming up blank here. This is too hard. I can't think of one, so I'm just going to go with one you know, perro, dog, because I love dogs. Perro, of course, is ending with the letter O, so instead of using la, we're going to use el, okay? Now, again, there will be times where you don't know the gender because you haven't learned it. You haven't been taught the gender. But like I said, when in doubt, if the letter ends in O, or excuse me, if the word ends in O, it's going to be masculine. If the word ends in a, it's going to be feminine the majority of the time. So the dog is going to be masculine. Now, yes, animals can have different genders, of course. If you have a female dog, it might sound a bit strange to say el perro. If that were the case, if you knew the gender of the animal, you would not use. If you knew the gender of the animal was female, you would use la, and you would add an a ending or modify the ending some other way to indicate the change of the gender. But in general, if you do not know the gender of the animal, you just assume that it's masculine, unless that animal has a different specified gender. That's something we can get into another time. But for now, don't overthink it. Okay. Now, looking at these two, los and las, they are going to be used with plural nouns. So let's use the same two nouns we just used, except make them plural. We'll start with perro. And to make it plural, simple enough. Since the last letter is a vowel, we're just going to add an S. Easy, easy peasy, just like in English. So to say the dogs, plural, all we need to do is say los perros, okay? Because now we're working with these two, okay? This first one here is the masculine plural form. All right, so that's what we would use with perros, okay? Now, manzana, which meant, yep, apple. Again, it ends with a vowel, so we're just going to add an S to make it plural. Making things plural, making nouns plural is also covered in these notes. I'm not going to cover it here in too much detail, but it is in here, so I encourage you to take some time to look over that again. So we have manzanas now, which is apples, and we're going to use las to say the apples, because as we now know, manzana is feminine, as indicated by its last letter here, and it is plural because it has an S on the end. Okay, so the apples. All right, moving down, making sure I've covered everything. Now, again, remember there are exceptions to this whole ending letter rule, and there are nouns in Spanish that do not end in vowels. When that is the case, it's a matter of memorization and practice, repetition, etc., to memorize the gender. So flashcards are really good for that kind of thing. We also tend to discuss those types of nouns in class because it's harder to memorize their gender. But don't worry too much about that for now. I'm always going to help you to get to that point. And also, just FYI, when you have a noun that ends with a consonant, not a vowel, in Spanish, to make it plural, generally, you're just going to add the letter ES, the letters ES to make it plural. Again, that's covered in the notes here. I'm not going to go into much more detail. All right, now these are just the answers to the first 40 questions. I'm going to go through them very quickly, but pause this video as often as you need and go back if needed to make sure that you have the correct answers. But guys, this is muy importante. It's not just important that you have the right answers. It's important that you understand why they are the right answers. So don't just copy this down, because once we get to a test, you're going to need to be able to do these on your own, of course, okay? So look at what articles that I have put in here, and then observe the noun that goes with them, and see if the spelling indicates to you that the article that's used is the correct one. And if not, read through the notes and see if you can determine how these were the correct answers, okay? And I did double check them. They should all be correct, okay? So number 1, el padre, which is masculine and singular. Number 2, la madre, feminine and singular. Number 3, número 3, la chica, also feminine and singular. Número 4, los perros, masculine and plural. Número 5, el lápiz, masculine and singular. Okay, the rest I'm just going to give you the words and not the codes. Okay. Número 6, las estaciones. Número 7, el día. Número 8, los años. Número 9, el sol. Número 10, la lluvia. Okay. Then numbers 11 through 20, I'll go through these quickly. El libro, la sala, los gatos, las chanclas, la calavera, las ofrendas, el chico, los muertos, el muchacho, el mes. Okay? So translations of these are all here. I'm going to go over a couple of them. Most of these I think you should have already known, but I am going to go through a couple that might have confused you. Okay? So el sol and la lluvia. You have seen weather expressions involving these two weather situations. So for example, you've seen the phrase hace sol, which means it's sunny. So if you saw that word, you saw that word and thought, how does sol mean sun? I thought it meant sunny. Well, that would be a good train of thought, but remember that when you say hace sol, you're not literally saying it's sunny. You're saying basically it makes sun or it does sun. It doesn't really have an exact translation, but the point is this word sol actually means sun, the sun in the sky. And then la lluvia, you haven't seen this word spelled exactly this way. What you have seen is está lloviendo or llueve. Both of those expressions mean it's raining or it rains. Okay, so you can see that those with the double L's there, they do have a lot in common with this word lluvia. The only difference is that this word lluvia is a noun, meaning the concept of rain. And these words are verbs, meaning the action of raining. Okay, so that they're just slightly different situation than you had here with the sun. Okay, okay, la sala here, number 12. It says the room, and I did want to specify that la sala generally is going to be a living room, but I use it here because la sala can also refer to a classroom. You would usually call that the sala de clase, sala de clase. Sometimes that is referred to as el aula, el aula. I'll write that here just so you know it, el aula, okay? Los gatos is the cats. I probably didn't need to go over that one. Las chanclas is the sandals, but specifically flip-flops, and that's included because in Coco, first of all, they make chanclas in their shoe factory, and also the abuelita uses her chancla as a weapon. If you don't know what I'm talking about, then you need to rewatch Coco. La calavera is the skull. We've seen a lot of those lately in our movies and videos with Dia de los Muertos. Las ofrendas does actually mean the offerings, and there's a note about it down here. When we think of the ofrenda that we've learned about in class with Dia de los Muertos, we're generally thinking of the altar itself, but technically it's the things that go on top of the altar. This is not super important. This is not a word that you need to learn for any grammatical vocabulary purposes, really, for Spanish 1. It's just culturally relevant to the unit on Dia de los Muertos, okay? Los muertos is the dead as in plural, kind of referring to dead people. I know that's a little bit spooky. El muchacho means the young man or boy. There's a lot of words in Spanish for boy or girl, man or woman. This is just one of them, but it's usually referring to a young man, maybe a teenager. Okay, I think the rest are self-explanatory. Moving down, here we have some practice with plural. Make sure you got all these correct. All of these were easy, where mostly you just add the letter S to these, especially the ones that end with vowels. But notice that the ones that do not end with a vowel, such as nariz and monopatín, you add ES to those because they end with consonants. So what we have here is eye, eyes, mouth, mouths, nose, noses, skateboard, skateboards, bicycle, bicycles, video game, video games. Oops, there needs to be an S there. There we go. Okay. Then here's the definite articles you would use with those plural nouns that I just provided in red. Notice that all of these definite articles end with the letter S because they are the ones we're using only with plural nouns, such as the ones here in red, okay? Now, the indefinite article, it's just as important as the definite article, maybe not quite as common, but because this video is already quite long and I'm sure you guys are pulling your hair out, I'm going to skip over this section. I'm just going to quickly show you the answers. Remember, this is going to be posted in Canvas, so you can access these answers on your own and make sure that you got your own answers correct. Okay, and again, make sure that you understand why. Okay, but basically the difference between el, la, los, and las, and un, una, unos, and unas is that the el words are definite, and these words starting with the letter U are indefinite. So these are your a, an, and some. Much more common, you're going to see un and una. You're not going to see these guys too often in reality. Un and una are muy importante, though. They mean a or an, such as a dog, an apple, okay? Un is not necessarily equivalent to a, and una is not necessarily equivalent to an. The a-an thing really just has to do with the spelling of the noun in English. Whereas, so for example, like if the word starts with a vowel in English, you use an, such as an apple. Whereas if it starts with a consonant like dog, you use a dog. In Spanish, you don't do the same thing there. These just refer to the gender. So un perro, una manzana, okay? Doesn't matter if the Spanish nouns start with a vowel or not, okay? I know this is a lot of information. So again, make sure you know that these answers are here and that you got the correct ones yourself. All right, and then finally at the end here, we have all the answers to where I combined your definite articles and indefinite articles. Some of these words you may have had to look up on your own. That's okay. Just again, make sure you got them correct. The bonus questions are good to learn from as well, even though they were a bit more challenging. I'm sure there's more that I could cover, but that's way more than enough information for now, and I hope you got something out of this review. We will talk about it in class again as well. Okay, adios, nos vemos.